أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد إمام المهديين وسلم تسليما السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear sister Ailia.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Al-Sadiq.
It's so good to have you here.
I'm very excited about being here. Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about an interesting topic, and that is astrology in religion and in particular Islam. So we have these two sciences, Ailia. We have these two sciences that sound similar, and they're often confused with one another. We have astronomy and astrology. And both of them have to do with the study of the heavenly bodies, or the solar system, the sky, the planets, the stars, but in different ways. So astronomy is what you would study if you go to university, for example, and you take a course in astronomy. It is the study of the planets, the stars, the sun, the moon, black holes, the galaxies, comets, meteors, as objects that are in the sky, a scientific approach and look at them, okay? And then you have astrology, which is an ancient science, okay? And it is similarly to astronomy, the study of the stars, the planets, the sun, the moon, the heavenly bodies, the meteors, the comets. But it's not a study of what material these planets are made of, for example, like in astronomy. They don't wonder in astrology or seek to know whether the planet can sustain life or not, or what types of gas exist on the planet, how dense the atmosphere is, or studying, for example, like the size of the planet or anything like this. But rather what they're studying and what they're interested in astrology is to know the particular effects that these planets have on human beings and animals and on events here on the planet Earth.
Right.
Okay? And so that is the difference between astrology and astronomy. Astronomy and astrology, they both agree to a certain degree that these heavenly bodies affect the planet. And they affect all creatures on the planet. For example, in astronomy, they believe that the sun is responsible for life on Earth, right? Because it provides warmth, it provides light, which is necessary for plants to grow and for creatures to live. They believe that the moon, for example, when there is a full moon, that it has effects on the tides of the ocean and the sea. Okay, so they do believe that the heavenly bodies, to certain degrees, affect natural events on the planets.
Okay.
But in astrology, they take it a step further, and they believe that depending on what date you were born, your personality is affected by those stars that were in the sky at that very hour where you were born. So they believe that the heavenly bodies, just like they affect the waves of the ocean, that they also affect the personality of the human being. And that they determine to a large degree the events, the hardships, the wealth, the destiny of a human. Okay? That the stars are responsible for that. And that's why, and and this is not a new science. This is a very ancient and old science that has been in existence for almost as long as man himself has existed. And even in this very day and age, there are many people who continue to watch astrologers predict world events and basically read your horoscope, whether on television shows or in astrology shops where they get paid, or at fairs where they might get paid to read your future through the stars.
Yeah.
We also know that astrology played a very significant role in magic, okay? Because, and in religion. So, in magic, they believed in the same things that astrologers believed in, but they took it a step further in the sense that they believed that these heavenly bodies that were responsible for certain events that would take place in a person's lifespan, that you could appeal to these heavenly bodies and offer them sacrifices, or communicate with them in certain ways, or chant certain phrases, and it would cause them to change the predestined effect that they had ordained for particular people. And they also believed that these powers that were coming from these heavenly bodies could be captured if you created certain statues or talismans underneath the light of that particular star or heavenly object that is in the sky.
Okay.
And so the magicians, a big part of their magic was the creation of protective talismans, or talismans that were responsible for attracting a spouse or for a particular thing. Do you understand?
Yes.
Yeah. And they would do that all by capturing the rays of light that came from these heavenly bodies while they were in the sky above. And some magical practices also involved the actual summoning of the heavenly body itself. And there are spells of this. There is many magical books that were written by Arabs over the centuries and even thousands of years ago. And also Indians. There's a very famous Indian magician who is well known for his magical writings, and even the Arabs and the Greeks, they took a lot from him. He offered basically he would teach in his writings, or Greeks who learned from him would write in their writings magical spells that they learned from him, in which he created statues underneath particular stars or constellations that would give these statues magical properties. Some of those magical properties would be, for example, that if people were to stare upon the statue, all fear would leave them, and they would be in a state of ease and in a state of peace. Other magical properties that would be transferred to the statues from the stars would be the statue would basically come alive, or would speak certain phrases, or be able to move. There are other spells whereby the magicians would basically offer particular blood sacrifices, and they would say that the planet itself would manifest in a spirit form in front of them, and they would be able after that to ask the planet to do its bidding, and it would grant them that. So you have magicians using astrology and considering it to be the center and most important core of all of the sciences of magic. You have mankind from the beginning of human history being fascinated with the stars and obsessed with obtaining news or prophecies of the future from these stars, or being able to read the events that would take place in a person's life by staring at the stars. You had kings in human history, and this is something which you can read about and has been preserved in the books and in the tales of the kings and queens that ruled the various empires, whether it was the ancient Egyptian civilization, or the Babylonians, or the Akkadians, or the Phoenicians, or the Romans, or the Greeks. So there were always, the kings would always take an interest and have right next to their advisors, they would have an astrologer who would work for them. And their job would simply be to look into the stars and tell if it was a good time to go into battle or to make certain political decisions. They would see if there was any incoming danger on the empire by gathering this information from the stars, and the astrologers would usually be the right-hand advisors or the hand or the wazir to the king himself.
Yes.
There are also religions that were developed around the worship of these celestial bodies, these heavenly bodies, these planets. You have the Mayans and you have the Aztecs, who all, as a part of their architecture, as a part of their civilization and their religious beliefs, they had adopted and depicted the heavenly bodies in their culture, and they used to appeal to certain celestial events that would take place in the sky as a means to gain power or please the gods. For example, they would offer sacrifices, human sacrifices, at the top of the pyramid when there used to be an eclipse that would take place. And this is depicted in movies, even in modern day, like the movie Apocalypto by Mel Gibson. And it recently even came out in the news that a few years back, it came out in the news that Ronald Reagan, who was one of the presidents of the United States, actually had an astrologer who worked in the White House, and he believed on her prophecies, and him and his wife heavily relied upon her. So you have in ancient times kings relying on these astrologers, and you also have in modern times, up till now, even though it's something that's not highly publicized, you have the kings and the queens, the prime ministers and presidents of countries relying on astrologers to help them navigate their kingship or their term in power. And when we look at the religions of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, usually one automatically assumes, due to certain hadiths, like the hadith that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and his family said, whereby he said, that the astrologers have lied, even if they told the truth, right? And other narrations that indicate that is something that is either haram or not liked, that a person, or something that is hated by God, that a person rely on the science of the stars.
Right.
And astrology is usually grouped up in the same category, and astrologers are kind of grouped in the same category as magicians and fortune tellers and people of this nature that are highly condemned, and also the Bible says must be put to death. And that's why you have the woman who summons the body or the soul of Samuel for the King Saul. In the Bible, she has to kind of like do it in secret. And even Saul, when he visits her, he has to also kind of cover his face and do it in secret, lest the people recognize that a king of Israel was relying on a magician. But yet we find that in the narrations of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and in the history of the prophets and the messengers, the science of astrology was a real science that the prophets and the messengers confirmed, had a basis in reality. It was not just some made-up mumbo-jumbo that was created by the devil, but rather it was an actual, factual science.
Wow.
Yes. And we have narrations that state explicitly that the knowledge of the stars originated with the successor. It was basically given to mankind with the successor of Enoch. Other people, they say that it was Enoch who was the first one who marked the movements of the stars and correlated it with events that were taking place on Earth, and was able to navigate through this science, write books about it, and dissipate it, to mankind. We have narrations that state also, Muhammad and the family of Muhammad say that the science was a reliable science, and that its origin was a prophet. And that prophet basically gave this knowledge to his people when he went and he called his people towards God, and they said to him, "We will never believe in you." Other narrations identify this prophet as Joshua, the son of Nun. Okay? And some other narrations say, no, it's impossible. It was a different prophet who existed much before that, but the general consensus is that it was Joshua, son of Nun.
Interesting.
And basically, they say so it's one of these people that Joshua and his army conquers. They refuse to believe in him. So unless he tells them the secrets of the birth dates and the death dates. And so Joshua prays to God, and God causes this cloud this heavy rain cloud to surround them in the valley. And he takes all of his people on the top of a mountain, and the rain cloud begins to pour rain, and it causes this big lake to be formed. And then the hadith says God commands the sun and the moon and the stars to run in the water, to reflect or cause some sort of reflection in the water. And so they look into the water, and it doesn't say how, but it does say that from the gazing into the water at nighttime, the reflections of the stars and the suns and the moons, and tracking their movements, Joshua, son of Nun, was able to show the people, and tell each one of their birth dates, and to teach them how to tell somebody's birth date by gazing into the reflection of the stars and the sun and the moon in a dark mirror, which would have been the lake that was formed at night, because that's all, it would have been a black mirror, basically, that's reflecting that. And he was also, more interestingly, able to tell their death dates. So he's able to see when they're born and when they're going to die. And these people ended up believing in the prophet because of that. And then they continued to have this power or this authority to to tell, basically. It was a science. It wasn't really a power or authority. It was a science that they were able to calculate the ages of mankind. And so they would always know who was going to die before it came time for them to die, which is a very useful science, because then somebody can be totally prepared for death, and family members would know, okay, I only have 30 days left with mom or with dad or with my sibling or with my friend. And so they continued to have this until the time of David, another narration states. And David ends up going to war against these people, because after they had followed the prophet, they end up going astray. And David, every time he goes into battle with these people, soldiers from David's side would die, whereby soldiers from the city's side would never die. And David was confused, and he prayed to God, and he said, God, what's going on? I'm your king, I'm your vicegerent, I'm your successor, I'm your messenger. You know, you're the God of Israel, you're with me. And every time you send me out to battle against these people are never losing a single soldier, and I'm losing all of my soldiers. What is the secret behind this? You know? And God reveals to him, don't worry, David, they don't have any powerful force with them, nor am I with them. But rather what they're doing is, I had given them this knowledge a long time ago with a prophet. And so what they do is they calculate the ages and the death dates of the people. And they see all those people who their death has not been ordained yet. And they send them out to the battle to fight against you. All those people who it's not time for them to die, and all those people who it is time for them to die, they keep them back in the city. So therefore, none of the people that fight you die, but your people, you don't have this science, this knowledge, and therefore you're unable to distinguish between who it is that their birthday has come or their death day has come. And so God then caused the sun to delay, and when he caused the sun to delay, the movement of the sun, it became slower than usual. It messed up their entire calculations, and they lost that science. And it says that from that time it became makruh, or hated, or not advisable by God and his messenger, that people look into the science of the stars. And also other narrations from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they say very explicitly that yes, the knowledge of astrology, it was a true science. You could tell from it the future. You could tell from it many things. But after a couple events happened, and they mentioned 3 times that the sun was delayed or moved from its place, that messed up the calculations, and now the science itself is not reliable. One time when God, caused the calculations to be messed up for David. Another time when the sun was delayed for Joshua, son of Nun. And a third time when the sun was delayed for Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Wow. That is really incredible. The fact that it's something that you can even see in history, these 3 events, and people know about them generally, especially the Amir al-Mu'mineen one is familiar to me. I've heard about that. But I didn't realize that it would actually have an effect on the astronomy of the skies and the heavens and the science itself.
Yeah, and there were. So now, from these narrations, we see that astrology was a real science, and that's what's important to demonstrate. It's not something that just like ancient, old, ignorant people used to believe in for no reason. No, if the kings and the and the governments and the peoples of old took this science seriously to the point that it has survived until today, that it was based on something real, and we know also from the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam that not only was it real, but it was a science like any other science, and it was from God, that like God taught it. It was a prophetic science. It was not something which was haram or something that has to do with devil worship, but rather it was something that the holiest of people practiced and they looked into and they studied people from Enoch to Methuselah to Noah to Joshua and David, peace be upon them. And we also have narrations that in the time of the Prince of the Believers, alayhi salam, people asked the Prince of the Believers, or they claimed to be an astrologer. They claimed to have knowledge of the stars. And then Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam would expose them by asking them a few questions. He would ask them, what is the star that if it rises, it causes the horses to rage? You know, or what is the star that if it rises, it causes the cows to rage? What is the star that if it rises, it causes the dogs to rage? And each time they would say, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And so Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam would say, yes, you've told the truth, you don't know. So the question of Amir al-Mu'mineen proves that there are stars that have an effect on entire species of creatures.
Wow.
So there is a star, just like the moon can cause the tidal waves to rise. And also it is a fact that most women have periods around the time of a full moon. So there's an effect even that a moon can have, or the full moon can have on humans in that regard. But there are also particular stars that will, a particular star that will have an effect on horses, but no other creatures. Another star will have an effect on cows. Another star will have an effect on dogs, and as such. And then Amir al-Mu'mineen asks the man, and so what do you guys say about Saturn? And then the so-called astrologer said, we consider it to be a bad omen. So when this star, this planet, meaning Saturn, would rise in the sky, they would consider that to be a sign of bad fortunes or bad things to come. And then Amir al-Mu'mineen corrects him and he says, you've lied. But rather, that is the star of the vicegerents.
Wow.
Yeah. And in other narrations, the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they say that the star of Saturn is the star of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam.
That's amazing.
And that's why Saturn has a ring, because the ring is like the crown that's around the head of the vicegerent, or around the head of Imam Ali alayhi salam.
That's a very beautiful link, honestly.
Yeah, so then we have other narrations, Ailia, that also basically praise people who have used this science and connected it to the birth of prophets and messengers. And basically, they spoke about how, these narrations speak about how astrology would have been used as one of the ultimate ways to identify the proof. Right? So we have this law, right? The law of knowing the Hujjah, which consists of the will and consists of the knowledge and consists of the banner of al-Bay'a lillah.
Yes.
But does it mean that they are the only ways that a person can identify the Hujjah? There are other ways, and we know that from narrations that there was a companion that was confused on whether or not Imam Ali al-Rida was a true Imam, and then he made istikhara, and based on his istikhara, he believed in him. Other people, they identify the Hujjah by asking God and going off of their dreams. Well, one of the ways that people identified the Hujjah was through astrology. And by looking for that star which would rise that is connected to the promised Savior or the prophet or the messenger of that time. In one narration, the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they speak about the time of Abraham, and they say that in the time of Abraham, Nimrod had an astrologer, and that astrologer was actually the father of Abraham. And the father of Abraham was an advisor to Nimrod and an astrologer. And he basically tells Nimrod one day that he's seen something disturbing in the stars. Nimrod says, what? The father of Abraham tells him, I saw that there's going to be born somebody who's going to destroy your kingdom. And Nimrod freaks out. That's how seriously he takes the advice of the father of Abraham, the astrologer advisor. He wouldn't have taken his advice seriously if there wouldn't have been many times and many issues and many things that the father of Abraham would have told him that would have came to pass.
Yeah, of course.
And so he commands that all of the women basically be brought into the city. All of the women. He said, no man, do not allow any man to be with his wife tonight. And he brings all of the women and he separates them from the men and he forbids them from having intercourse on one particular night, which means that the science and the advice of Abraham's father, the astrologer of Nimrod, was so accurate that it could pinpoint to a particular night and hour when the conception of a prophesied king or person or Messiah or Savior would be. And so all of the people, they abstained, and he managed to separate them from their wives on that day. But the only person who actually went home and had intercourse with their wife was Abraham's father.
Wow.
Because it never crossed his mind that it was him. That was maybe an aspect of the science that he didn't know or that was hidden by God from him. Wow. And his wife became pregnant to his surprise. And he knew then that this son of his was actually the one whom he had seen in the stars. So there's an example of Abraham's father being able to recognize that there's a hujjah that's coming or a special person that's coming by looking into these stars. There's another hadith which also mentions that in the time of Moses, the Pharaoh at that time, before Moses was born, he had a dream. It was a disturbing dream where he sees this fire is coming out of Jerusalem and it's engulfing all of Egypt. So he goes to his astrologers and his dream interpreters and he says, what in the world have I seen? I've seen this disturbing dream, and he narrates it to them. And they interpret the dream for him and they say that the meaning of the dream is basically that there's going to be born a man from the Hebrews who is going to destroy your kingdom. And so Pharaoh flips out and he gathers his astrologers and he tells them to look in the stars and find out when is this threat coming. And they track down the exact birth date of Moses. And so Pharaoh gives the order that all of the children that are born on that particular night are to be killed. So he doesn't do what Nimrod does. He's unable to gather all the people. And he just decides that he's going to kill all of the newborn males. And so there once again, another narration stating that before the coming of another savior, which was Moses, another prophet messenger, the bad people, the forces of evil, were able to identify when he was going to come. And in the same way, another narration states that also at the time of the birth of Jesus, peace be upon him, there were people who looked into the star. They were magi. They were followers of the Zoroastrian religion. And they found in the stars that soon there was going to be born this great prophet. And they were able to track down not just the birth date, but also the birth location. And that is the story that we find in the New Testament in the scene of the birth of Christ, where you have these three kings or these three magi that had traveled from far away, and they approach Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus once he's born, and they know him and who he is. They identify him. They believe in him by looking in the stars. And that is a very interesting narration because what it means is that not only is astrology a way that you can identify a proof of Allah, but also righteous people are praised. Those three kings were praised. Those three magi were praised for using that science to identify Jesus, because this bright star appeared, and with that birth of that star in the sky, they knew that as such would happen a birth on the earth, and just as that star became so bright and had a special place among the stars in the heaven, as such there would be born a human being who would be just as bright for the people of the earth. And so they believe in Jesus Christ and they prostrate to him. And another narration basically says that the same thing happened before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that is that the Hercules, who was the king of the Romans at the time, as well as Khusra, the king of the Persians, that both of them had consulted with their astrologers, and both of them had seen in the stars, or their astrologers had seen in the stars, that there was going to be born a man of a great matter. And they asked their astrologers about the coming of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they gathered information about him, and lo and behold, many years later, when the Prophet was sent, he does end up addressing these two kingdoms and sending them letters and identifying himself and speaking to them, because they already knew who he was and had already gotten news from their own sources. And just a side note, that if we look at the narrations of the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, and we look at history and we look at the Bible, we look at the words of the prophets and the messengers. I mean, in the Quran, you even have that Abraham looked in the Quran in the verse, and he says, and he looked once into the sky, and he said, "Verily, I am sick." So Abraham was, the narration state, that he knew this science of astrology, and one day he's walking, he looks in the sky, he sees the stars, he reads them, he's able to tell that he's going to be sick, so he knows that he's sick, and diagnoses himself before he actually feels any symptoms. And we see in these narrations how the tyrants would know if there was a threat coming. And we know that even though the narration stated that after the time of David and after the time of Joshua, the calculations became confused, we still see that the Magi in the time of Jesus that came much after that, they still have that they had obviously corrected the errors and were able to, reestablish that science, or it survives to where they're able to identify Jesus, even though it's many, many years after the science was allegedly, deemed corrupt. And it makes you wonder that if that was the sunnah of before, and God never changes his sunnah, and we know that these stories just keep repeating themselves, and that's why God places the stories of the prophets and the messengers in the Quran, in order that we may know that that which happened before will happen again. Just like the non-working scholars fought the prophets and the messengers before, they're also going to fight the Mahdi. Just like the leaders of the countries fought the prophets and the messengers before, they will also in this day and age fight the Mahdi. As such, the leaders and the kings who relied on astrologers in the past to know of the coming of the Mahdi, we can expect that the modern day leaders, whom we already stated, and we can show you a clipping on the screen right now, that from an old newspaper article that shows that Ronald Reagan had relied on astrologers, and that the White House presidents do depend on this science, will make making decisions to invade other countries. We can see now clearly that the leaders of these countries had looked in the stars, and they had identified and known that the Mahdi was to appear in this day and age. And for that reason, we see that there's been this emphasis in the past, couple decades, since 2001, not even 2001, but actually since 1991, up until now with Desert Storm 1, and then the invasion of Afghanistan, and then the invasion of Iraq with George W. Bush Jr., and then you have also the destruction of all of the Muslim countries, and the wars that are continuously taking place in the Muslim lands, and the constant insistence of westernizing and controlling and building U.S. bases in these countries in the Middle East. It's all in anticipation of the emergence of the promised Mahdi, that they saw his coming happening in the stars.
That is incredible. That explains so much, because if you look at it from that angle, that there is a divine plan and there is something in the stars, and they're able to look at it for sure, then of course it would explain this, like you said, this influx of sudden change and them infiltrating and trying to be there and establish themselves there. That just explains it so much.
Yes, it does. And we have Gnostic manuscripts too, Ailia. Like the Gospel of Judas. And in this gospel, you have conversations that take place between Jesus Christ and Judas before his betrayal. Right after, the Last Supper, right before his betrayal. And from the many things that Jesus discusses with Judas, and there's a lot that we can say about this gospel, and I'm going to cover that with Tiffany in a future episode. But in what's important to us in this part is that some of these conversations that take place with Judas, between Judas and Jesus, surround the idea that Judas has this star above him. And this star that's above, that's connected to Judas, has led him astray. And Jesus tells Judas that everybody on the planet has a star that's above, and it reminds us of the verse of the Quran that says that every self has a guardian above it. And so there is this connection that is made between the people of the earth and the stars above. We knew that Jesus had a star, the vicegerents had a star that would appear when they appeared. We knew that there was stars that would affect the behavior, but now in the Gospel of Judas, we know that there are stars or planetary shining bodies in the heaven that correlate with every single person that's on the earth. That it's not just Jesus that has a star, but it's also every other person also has a star. Some people have bright stars. Some people have stars that you can't even see with the naked eye because they are so dim. And these are probably people that are quite dark or away from God or astray. And this matches some of the narrations from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam that are quite mystical in nature, that were never before understood. One narration states that the science of astrology was lost from the people, but it survived only in two households, a household from the Arabs and a household from the Indians. There's another narration which states that basically somebody came forward, a real knowledgeable man, and he goes to somebody from the non-Arabs, a Gentile man, perhaps a European, perhaps an African, somebody who's not a Semite, from the children of Sam. And he basically tries to teach him the knowledge of the stars. And he asks him, where is Jupiter? And they say, I don't know where Jupiter is. And then he abandons him and decides to look for a new student. And then he takes a student from the Indians. He chooses a household from India, and he chooses one particular person from that household to teach him. And he studies under him for many years, and then at the end of his studies, he asks him the same question that he asked the student before that failed. Where is Jupiter? And so the man from India begins to calculate, and he looks into the stars. And then the narration says, he looks over at his teacher and he says, by my calculations, you are Jupiter. And the moment that he says this, the narration says, he gasps and dies. And that's the end of the narration. And so the people use it to say, oh, okay, well, the science of astrology was real, but they don't really focus on this second part, which is more important. And that is that Jupiter had a manifestation or an appearance on the earth. That what this teacher was wanting to pass along to him, this heavy science, this heavy knowledge that nobody can handle except if they're a prophet messenger or a close angel or a believer whose heart has been tested for faith, or else they die. Part of that knowledge was the knowledge that there's a connection between the stars and between the earth. That the earth is a place where the rays of the stars are able to enter into human beings that are born and animate them. The earth is a realm where the stars are able to take on avatars so that they can mingle with one another and have a human experience whereby they forget who they were and their origin for a lifetime.
That's amazing. That is incredible. And the significance of stars and how much people find them important. They look up to them. They actually, it's so much in pop culture, it's in literature. People talk about it all the time, but there is this weird familiarity with them, right? And this fascination for the stars. And what you've just said right there is kind of explains it a little bit, I think.
No, it explains it a lot. And it's further proven. This is not just a theory that's made up, by me. It is something that is further proven and confirmed from the words of the Ahl Bayt al-Islam. Because you have this manuscript, Al-Hafs al-Sharif, and in Al-Hafs al-Sharif, it has a whole door about the heavenly bodies. And we mentioned the Al-Hafs al-Sharif before, this mystical book that was, written by Mufaddal ibn Umar, whereby he's having these conversations with Imam Ja'far Al-Sadiq. And so he asks him about the heavenly bodies. And Imam Al-Sadiq, alayhi salam, he says very clearly, he says that these heavenly bodies, they appear that way in the skies for those that are unlike them. So
what does that mean?
It means that a star does not see another star or a planet in the same way that we see the planets and the stars.
Okay.
That they only look that way from our perspective. But from the perspective of the stars and the planets, they look a different way. It's like the stars and the planets, maybe their eyes, they have insight or eyes that whereby they can see, or a consciousness that they may perceive each other and themselves in a different appearance than that which we are seeing, because we are merely 3D creatures or have these eyes that only perceive 5% of light. So when we look at it, we only see this shining sphere or this shining circle that's in the sky, but in reality, it's something else. And so Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam goes on further, and he explains that these shiny objects that you see in the sky, these are the bodies of the believers that were made for them out of their good deeds. So it's kind of like, just like in The Lion King, except said by Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam many, many years before The Lion King, or Pinocchio, where they're wishing upon a star, and the fairy goes up and she becomes a star in the heavens and all that. It was already stated by the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam that good people, good lions, like Mufasa told Simba, when they die, they become somebody,
yes.
because of their works. Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he's telling Al-Mufaddal that when a believer has really good works on the earth, out of the works of the believer, that's how much that their star shines in the sky.
I wish we could know how they see each other, because obviously, like you said, we only see what we see as human beings, but that is so fascinating to know that the way that these planetary bodies or these stars look at each other, it's a whole different perspective.
Yeah. So what is the light bodies? I mean, because he says that these are their bodies that was created for them out of light, out of their deeds.
Yeah.
And they're existing in the heavens up above. The heavens are the realms whereby the jinn are stealing news of what's to come. It's the realm of dreams. It's the realms of where the souls go, when they're ascending up to God after that. It is the realm that people used to look into the skies at night, and the people of ancient used to believe that when a person dies, that his soul had to pass by all of these archons that guard the heavens, and they considered each one of the planets to be an archon. So you go to the first gate, which is like the moon, for example, and then you'd be questioned by it. And then if your soul passes by, then you'd be questioned by another one and another one of the planets,
Wow.
whether it's Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, or the Sun, or Mercury, or Venus, until you reach the final destination, and that is the seventh heaven, or the realm that's above the seventh heaven, which is beyond the seven celestial bodies that they could identify at that time, which was basically Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. They didn't know Uranus and Neptune and Pluto back then. And so the implication here is that the planets that are in the skies are the souls. It is the bodies that the souls, or that which is beyond the soul, inhabits in the heavens. It is the light whereby they get to rest. And whenever they incarnate, that light shines on a particular world and animates a body from that particular world. And so all of the stars in the sky, Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam is saying, they incarnate on the planet Earth by shining into individuals. And that is the entrance of the soul into the body, is the shining of the star into the into the physical body below. And that's how the vicegerents were able also to identify whether or not somebody was a good person or a bad person, or perhaps what incarnation they had. One of the methods that they were able to identify was knowing which star it was that was shining into which body. And sometimes somebody would go and that star would no longer shine or animate on a particular person until a future date, and then that would happen. And we have also in modern culture, we have a Mark Twain, a particular author. He had also been born when a comet appeared, when a certain comet appeared in the sky. And he believed that once that comet came back again, he would leave this world. He said, I entered in with this comet appearing, and I will exit with this comet appearing. And that's exactly what happened, is that his death date took place on he died and left this world on the same date that same comet passed by again, the one that passed by when he came into this world. So religious people, non-religious people, narrations from the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, they all confirm that there is a connection between the heaven above and the events on earth below, a connection between the celestial bodies above and the individuals below. And we know also from the words of Imam Ahmad al-Hassan salam, the Imani and the messenger of Imam al-Mahdi in this day and age to people, that is exactly what the celestial bodies are above, that they are the souls of the believers in the heavens above, and and I guess we'll end the episode by maybe identifying a few of them for the people. So, for example, the star of Sirius, which is called the dog star. And the Freemasons, it's a central star in Freemasonry, and it represents the one eye because the reverse reading of the dog star is the God star. And they consider it to be the sun behind the sun because it is the brightest star with the most colors in the night sky. And it was a very significant star that was worshipped by many ancient cultures and civilizations, including the ancient Egyptians, who considered it to be Isis, who would accompany Osiris in the night sky. Osiris was represented by the constellation of Orion, while Sirius would be basically Isis. And Isis, or the eye star, or the dog star, or the God star, that is worshipped and central in Freemasonry and considered to be the source of all life on earth. This star that is mentioned also in the verse in the Quran in which God says, and verily he is the Lord of Sirius, to emphasize that even Sirius himself, this star that people think is responsible for all life on earth, that even this star has a Lord above it. This star is the star of Iblis. This is Satan, Lucifer, so to speak. That is his soul. And that is why they claim that he was responsible, this star is responsible for all life on earth, because he's the angel that was used by God in the narrations of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad to create the physical universe. And he's the prince of this world that was mentioned by Jesus in the New Testament. And the one who rules this realm, it is Sirius. And Sirius is Iblis, Lanatullah alayh. And you have the planet Earth, that we are currently residing on. This also is a soul, and it is the soul of the Prophet Adam, who we all reside on, and we're having this experience on currently. And that's why it's all about mankind in this incarnation, because the stars are shining on this earth. And the stars have shined on other Earths, and those other Earths or planets used to be and are and still are and were souls of other prophets or messengers or individuals. And there's worlds that the stars are shining on simultaneously, and these souls are incarnating at the same time on multiple planets or in multiple worlds. But this is a topic that I don't want to get into too much, because I don't want to confuse people at the moment. And you have the planet Mars, who is mentioned in the narrations of the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, when they're speaking about the time of the Qaim. There's many narrations that speak about a planet that appears in the sky. It's a sign of the rise of the Qaim. This planet has 2 moons or 2 accompanying comets. It's described as a red planet, a planet that terrifies the Arabs. So just as there's some stars that have an effect on the dogs or the horses or the cows, this star has a particular effect, and it's an effect not of rage but of terror that is stricken into the hearts of Arab people in particular. And it is the star of the Qaim, and it is the red planet, and the red planet is Mars, and Mars has 2 moons. One moon is called fear, and the other moon is called terror. And those are the 2 moons that accompany the red planet. And so the red planet's the Qaim that appears in this day and age in order to take vengeance for Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. And it is the planet that was identified with war and with bloodshed. And it is the planet that is the soul of the Qaim of the family of Muhammad.
That's amazing, especially the aspect that when we look at the hadiths that say that the Qaim will bring this new matter, which will be heavy on the Arabs, and they're sticking to their old Islamic Arab-centric way of understanding and their old covenant, because he brings a new covenant. And the fact that Mars is having that effect on this nation, that's incredible. The synchronicity between the 2 facts.
It is.
And also, I think it's worthy of note that it was known to many of the Muslims that when the Qaim does appear, he brings the true knowledge of these matters of astrology and astronomy, and that they were hidden and they were obscure to the people for so long, and they were waiting to have that clarity. And I'm really excited to learn more about these facts and the science from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ailia. And it shouldn't be something that's strange to Muslims, because
absolutely,
people believe that when they dream, they see things that are in the kingdoms of the heavens, right? In the malakut, and we have in the Quran the dream of Joseph when he saw his father and his mother and his brothers in the kingdoms of the heavens. He saw them as the sun and the moon and the planets. And so for that reason, nobody should think that any of this stuff is strange at all. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, Ailia.
Thank you so much for this experience of Al-Sadiq.
God bless
you. It was amazing.